Have you ever been with someone who pulls away just when things start getting good? Who leans in one day then disappears the next? Who seems deeply connected in one moment but distant and unreadable the moment intimacy knocks a little louder? You're not crazy for feeling confused. You're not needy for wanting clarity. You're not asking for too much. You're facing one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern relationships, the avoidant attachment style. And here's the thing, most people get it entirely wrong. We're told avoidants are cold, emotionally unavailable, afraid of love. But what if I told you they're not afraid of love? They're afraid of what love demands: vulnerability, surrender, exposure. And that's where the war begins, not between you and them, but inside their body, their memory, their nervous system. When you look at someone avoidant, you're not looking at someone incapable of connection. You're looking at someone wired to survive connection by resisting it. The common myth, if they really cared, they wouldn't act like that. The deeper truth, if they didn't care, they wouldn't be scared at all. That fear you're witnessing, it's not disinterest, it's protection. It's self-preservation disguised as detachment. That silence you feel, it's not rejection, it's a nervous system scanning for safety, a reflex built from years of wounds and psychological withdrawals. But here's the breakthrough, and it changes everything. When an avoidant finally feels safe enough to love, they don't just move toward you, they collapse into you. And what you witness in that moment isn't performance. It isn't manipulation. It's one of the rarest emotional transformations a human can undergo. And if you don't know what to look for, you might miss it. Or worse, mistake it for inconsistency and walk away from one of the bravest acts of love there is. So in this video, I'm not going to give you surface level tips on how to decode a text message or get more replies. No, we're going deeper than that. I'm going to walk you through the 6 unmissable signs that an avoidant has started to feel safe and what they actually do when love stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like home. These signs are quiet, subtle, but they're massive. And once you know how to spot them, you'll never look at love the same again. This isn't just about romance. It's about the kind of love that rewires someone's instincts, that softens trauma, that builds intimacy, not from fantasy, but from raw emotional courage. This is what it means to love someone through the lens of Stoicism, to stay grounded, strong, and present in the face of fear, not to fix them, but to anchor them. This is love Stoic. And once you understand the signs, you'll understand the sacred responsibility that comes with being the person an avoidant finally feels safe with. And let me warn you, what you're about to hear might change how you see the avoidant person in your life, or even how you see yourself. Because sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs don't scream, they whisper. So don't miss the whisper. Stay with me to the end, because part 6, that's where everything shifts. Are you ready? Let's go. 1. They show up in small but meaningful ways. There's a quiet revolution happening when an avoidant starts to feel safe, but it's not loud and it's not obvious. It doesn't come wrapped in poetic declarations or sweeping gestures. No, it shows up in the tiniest behavioral shifts, ones that most people miss entirely because they're looking for something grand. But if you've ever loved someone who's avoidant, you'll know this. Love for them is a war they're still fighting, even in your presence. When that war begins to settle, when the alarms of their nervous system begin to dull, you start to notice something strange, something subtle. They start showing up, not in big ways, but in small seismic ones. A slightly quicker response to your text, an unprompted question about your day, an extra moment held in a hug. The world won't notice, but if you're attuned, your heart will. Because for an avoidant, every act of presence is a risk. Their body isn't used to intimacy as a source of calm. It's used to seeing it as a trap. So when they begin leaning in even just a little, it's not accidental, it's not random, it's the result of their internal system starting to trust that maybe, just maybe this time, love doesn't equal danger. That maybe showing up won't cost them their freedom, their safety, or their dignity. And this right here is where most people go wrong. They dismiss those small signs. They minimize them. They say, he still doesn't call enough, or she still seems closed off. But they fail to realize that for someone avoidant, a single step toward you is equivalent to climbing an emotional Everest. Not because they're trying to be difficult, but because everything in their subconscious is screaming at them to pull back. Their heart might long for connection, but their nervous system is conditioned for withdrawal. So when they start to show up, when they send that good morning text without being prompted, when they sit next to you without you asking, when they offer their presence even when it's hard, don't overlook it. Recognize the quiet courage it takes for them to be near you without fleeing, to ask about you without intellectualizing it, to let you into a space they usually guard with emotional barbed wire. This is not manipulation. This is not a tactic. This is what love Stoic looks like in real time. It's not passion without fear. It's commitment despite it. And in Stoicism, we learn to respect what doesn't scream for attention. We learn to recognize the significance of steady hands over dramatic displays. Avoidants don't need to be loud to love you deeply. Their love doesn't explode. It simmers. It builds. It begins in glances, in pauses, in questions that seem small but are rooted in enormous internal effort. And perhaps that's what makes their love harder to recognize, but also infinitely more meaningful when you do. Because here's the thing, consistency for them is not a habit. It's a breakthrough. Predictability for them is not default. It's earned inch by inch. Their version of showing up isn't about always being emotionally fluent. It's about being emotionally brave. They don't rush in with words they don't mean. They inch forward with actions they barely know how to trust. They're not wired to perform intimacy. They're learning how to survive it. And as they start to show up, you'll notice them beginning to track your energy. They'll catch on to your moods faster. They'll remember small things you said. They'll make space for your needs in ways that may not be perfect, but are intentional. And this shift doesn't happen because they're suddenly healed. It happens because your presence starts feeling less like a fire and more like shelter. Because when you show up in calm, they learn to show up in courage. Their love may look like an awkward text or an unexpected favor. It may sound like, "Did you eat today?" or "What's on your mind?" But make no mistake, that's not casual, that's monumental. That's what Stoicism teaches us. To see behind the surface, to look beneath the noise, to understand the weight of what isn't said. So the next time they show up, even in the smallest way, don't underestimate it. That's not just affection. That's resistance being replaced by risk. That's a heart choosing presence over panic. That's a soul remembering that closeness doesn't have to mean collapse. And it might be clumsy. It might be slow, but it's real. It's intentional. And if you learn to notice those moments, to hold space for them, to stay steady without demanding performance, you'll become something rare to them. A safe place, not a trigger. A mirror, not a judge. A witness to the beginning of something sacred. Their decision to try again. And it's not easy for them to get there. In fact, you won't believe what they start doing next. Not until you see how deep their transformation runs in part 2. 2. They drop the armor, bit by bit. It doesn't happen in one moment. You don't wake up next to them and suddenly feel like their entire emotional world is unlocked and open for you to walk through. No. When an avoidant starts to feel safe enough to love, it doesn't look like an explosion of vulnerability. It looks like subtle fractures in a wall that once felt impenetrable. Their armor, forged from rejection, abandonment, emotional starvation, and the kind of tough love that teaches you to survive instead of feel, it starts to shift. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And if you're not paying close attention, you might not even notice it. But if you are, you'll feel the difference. One sentence, one pause, one breath. Suddenly, they tell you something they've never shared with anyone, not because they want attention, not because they want sympathy, but because your presence feels like something they don't need to guard themselves against. And that moment, that right there, that is an act of courage far beyond what most people ever see. Because the avoidant doesn't just carry pain, they carry a blueprint for survival that taught them closeness equals danger, that taught them that opening up means giving someone the ammunition to wound them later. And when they start to go against that script, even in the smallest way, what you're witnessing isn't weakness. It's a quiet rebellion against their own conditioning. Love Stoic. That's what this is. The Stoic doesn't love by accident. The Stoic doesn't open up for comfort. The Stoic opens up when the terrain feels strong enough to hold what's been buried for decades. And that terrain is you, your steadiness, your consistency, your refusal to flinch when they say something raw or real or half-formed. When they begin dropping their armor, it's not just about telling you their story, it's about testing if you're the kind of person who can witness it without trying to fix it, rush it, or make it about yourself. They want to know if you can hear about their chaos without turning away, if you can stay when they show the part of themselves that still feels unlovable. The truth is, most people think avoidants are guarded because they don't care. But the reality is, they've built that armor because they've cared too deeply and been left alone in that caring too many times. So now, safety doesn't feel like an embrace. It feels like a question. And when they start to drop their defenses, they're not doing it because they're ready. They're doing it because they're choosing to be brave anyway. That is stoicism in practice. Not the absence of fear, but moving through fear with intention. You'll notice them beginning to speak from their heart more, not with flowery language, but with honest, unedited truth. They'll tell you what scares them. They'll admit when they feel overwhelmed. They'll say, I don't know how to talk about this, but I want to try. And that desire to try, that's everything. That's the shift. That's what most people overlook because they expect emotional intelligence to look polished and eloquent. But for the avoidant, emotional bravery is the goal, not emotional performance. When they drop their armor, they begin letting you see the parts of them that were once hidden out of necessity, the childhood memories that shaped their walls, the relationship patterns they swore they'd never repeat but now realize they're still healing from, the dreams they were afraid to speak because dreaming has always felt dangerous. And as they reveal these pieces of themselves, you become something more than just a partner or a friend. You become the first place in their life that didn't require them to armor up, the first space where vulnerability didn't lead to punishment, the first relationship that didn't demand emotional perfection, but honored emotional effort. That's where transformation lives, not in dramatic displays of trust, but in the slow, trembling surrender of someone who's never had the privilege of safety before. And it's messy, it's imperfect. Sometimes they'll say too little, sometimes they'll say too much, sometimes they'll pull back just when you thought they were finally letting you in. But that's part of it. That's part of the process of dropping armor when you've lived your entire life inside it. And you have a choice. You can see those moments as regression, or you can see them as recalibration, as proof that they're stretching muscles that have never known softness. Because here's the truth. To drop your armor is to risk your heart. And avoidants have learned that every time they risked their heart, they were left holding the broken pieces alone. So now your response matters more than you realize. Your silence in the face of their fear, your steadiness in the presence of their stumbles, your patience with their pace, that's what allows the armor to drop further. Not words, not promises, presence, consistency, curiosity without judgment. And the more you meet them there, the more they begin to let go, not of themselves, but of the need to protect themselves from you. That's where love becomes healing, where connection becomes reprogramming, where the instincts to withdraw begin to soften under the weight of a bond that doesn't demand, doesn't press, doesn't punish. A bond that simply stays. And there's something sacred about witnessing that kind of shift. It's not just love, it's restoration. It's not just safety, it's sacred space. And when that happens, their entire internal system starts to change. They breathe deeper. They speak more freely. They laugh with less restraint. They stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and start wondering if maybe, just maybe, this is what trust is supposed to feel like. And when they ask you about your pain, your past, your heart, know that it's not just curiosity, it's connection. It's the beginning of something real. Love Stoic doesn't perform, it invites, it witnesses, it stays. And if you're watching them open up, truly open up, you are watching them do something that goes against everything they were taught to do. That's what makes it profound. And if this video is speaking to your heart, if you feel seen by what we're unpacking here, like this video and comment #1 below, let me know this message is reaching you. And if you want to walk this journey of deep connection, grounded presence, and emotional mastery together, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more to come. 3. They test the safety, not to manipulate, but to trust. What most people misinterpret as games or manipulation from an avoidant partner is, in fact, something much more primal and tragic, an unconscious survival response to perceived threat, a test not designed to hurt you, but to help them feel safe. When an avoidant begins to feel the early tremors of emotional closeness, their system doesn't immediately register it as comfort. It registers it as potential danger. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because their blueprint for connection has been shaped by pain, betrayal, inconsistency, or abandonment. Their body still believes that closeness equals vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to suffering. So the closer they feel to you, the louder the alarm bells inside begin to ring. This isn't about logic, it's about memory, emotional memory stored in the nervous system, in the body, in the cells. So when they begin to test the safety of your presence, understand this. It's not about trying to manipulate your reactions. It's about trying to measure if they're finally in a space that won't punish their openness. The avoidant tests you not because they're cruel, but because they're scared. And fear, unprocessed and unspoken, becomes behavior. So they withdraw. They go silent. They stop texting back as quickly. They say things like, "I need space," or "I'm not good at relationships." Not because they don't care, but because they care more than they know how to hold. In those moments, they are not asking, "Will you chase me?" They're asking, "Will I still be safe if I pull back?" They are not testing your love to control you. They are testing whether love is a trap, whether your presence is conditional, whether your care depends on performance. And the way you respond to that silence, to that distance, will shape what happens next. If you chase, panic, guilt, or demand. If you make their temporary withdrawal about you, you unknowingly reinforce the fear that closeness equals chaos. But if you stay steady, calm, and emotionally grounded, if you mirror what Stoicism teaches us about composure and clarity, then something rare begins to happen. Their nervous system starts to recalibrate. The old belief that if I flinch, you'll disappear gets rewritten. The ancient reflex to run begins to soften. They start to understand, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that your presence isn't a performance. It's a practice, a choice, a reliable baseline in a world that's felt unstable for far too long. Love Stoic. That's what this phase demands. The Stoic doesn't interpret withdrawal as rejection. The Stoic doesn't panic in the face of silence. The Stoic recognizes that people test the ground before they stand on it fully. that even bravery needs reassurance. And so when the avoidant tests the safety of your bond, it's not about passing some emotional exam. It's about showing them in the quiet of your steadiness that they no longer need to monitor you like they once monitored danger, that you are not a trigger in disguise, you are not another ghost in the making, you are here, steady, unshaken. It's in this phase that you'll begin to notice small repetitions. They might pull back and then come close again. They might tell you something real and then go silent for days. They might initiate connection only to act like they didn't want it. And if you don't understand the psychology behind it, it can be infuriating. But if you do, you'll see what it really is: calibration. Their entire body is learning to hold intimacy without going into flight mode. And like any reconditioning process, there will be misfires. There will be retreats. There will be moments that feel like regression. But every single time they return, it's not just habit, it's choice. It's their nervous system slowly beginning to learn that they can be in closeness without collapsing, that they can feel deeply and not die from it, that vulnerability doesn't equal invisibility. They're learning how to stay present with emotion instead of fleeing it. And you are part of that healing. Not by doing more, not by fixing or chasing or soothing, but by simply not becoming another reason for them to run. That is the paradox. They test to see if you'll prove them right, that everyone leaves, that intimacy is unstable, that closeness is conditional. And when you don't, when you hold the line of presence without pressure, their old beliefs begin to weaken. And this is where the internal shift begins. Slowly, like sunrise behind fog, they start reaching out without fear of shame. They begin asking for what they need, even clumsily, instead of pretending they don't need anything. They stop checking for the exit and start noticing the warmth. It's no longer about testing your love. It's about trusting it. But this transition is fragile, and it requires one of the greatest forms of love: patience. A stoic kind of patience, one rooted not in waiting passively, but in remaining clear-headed and emotionally intelligent in the face of someone else's emotional recalibration. This isn't about tolerating disrespect. It's about understanding what survival looks like when it's trying to evolve. Avoidants don't move through healing with poetry. They move with data, with patterns, with consistency. You say you're safe? Show them. Show them in how you react when they flinch. Show them in how you respond when they freeze. Show them that you are not the storm they grew up bracing for, that you are not the punishment they were conditioned to expect, that you are the pause, the calm, the place where the fight ends. And when they realize that, they start replacing tests with trust. They stop needing to scan the room for emotional landmines. They begin relaxing into your energy, not because they've stopped being avoidant, but because they've stopped needing avoidance to survive. The triggers still exist. The fear still visits, but they stop obeying it. That's the miracle. That's the shift. That's love stoic. A love that's slow but sure, guarded but growing, frightened but present, not because it's easy, but because it's real. So when they test the safety of your love, don't take it as a challenge. Take it as an invitation, not to perform, but to remain. Because if they're still trying, even through silence, even through space, that means there's still hope. That means they haven't given up. And that in itself is a sacred sign. 4, they begin to prioritize the relationship. There's a turning point in the avoidance journey that you might not notice at first, but when it happens, it changes the entire dynamic. It's the moment they stop managing the relationship as a source of risk and start treating it as something worthy of investment, protection, and care. And it doesn't arrive with fireworks or romantic speeches. It shows up in ordinary moments: their awareness of your needs, their initiation of check-ins, their attention to your patterns and moods. When an avoidant starts to feel safe, they begin doing something they've never had the bandwidth to do before. Prioritize someone outside of their emotional defense system. But make no mistake, this isn't because they've become someone different. It's because you've created a different kind of emotional ecosystem around them. One that doesn't demand closeness. One that models emotional maturity. One that welcomes presence without pressure. And in that kind of environment, they begin to shift. Not dramatically, but reliably. They start making room for the relationship in their day. Not just in their schedule, but in their mental space. You'll feel it in the way they remember what you said a week ago, how they check in when something's been off with your tone, how they anticipate your needs without being told. These aren't people known for their attunement to others, but now they're starting to make you part of their internal rhythm. That is no small thing. For someone whose entire emotional architecture has been built on the premise that distance equals safety, to let another person influence their daily emotional climate is massive. It means you've become more than a companion. You've become an internal reference point, someone whose presence is factored into their sense of stability, someone whose well-being now carries weight in their decisions. This is not about codependency. It's not about losing themselves in you. It's about the exact opposite, integrating connection into their autonomy. For the first time, love isn't threatening their freedom. It's expanding it. Stoicism teaches us that freedom is not the absence of relationship, but the presence of clarity and groundedness in how we show up in relationships. The avoidant, learning through safety, begins to understand that prioritizing someone doesn't mean losing themselves. It means choosing to care while remaining whole. And this is where the most subtle, powerful work happens. They start scheduling time with intention, not out of guilt. They follow up not because they feel obligated, but because they care. They start showing you, not just telling you, that you matter. That your presence in their life is no longer something they manage around, but something they invest in. Love Stoic. You see it in how they adjust their routines to make space for you, in how they bring you into their decision-making, even if only in small ways at first, in how they begin to initiate connection without being prompted. And it's not perfect. It's awkward. They might stumble, they might overcorrect, but the fact that they are making the relationship part of their inner world is something extraordinary. Because for the avoidant, relationships have historically been things to navigate, not nurture, things to endure, not engage. But now they're starting to learn what it feels like to care without it costing their identity. They're not trying to earn your love or avoid your wrath. They're simply choosing to be present again and again. And that consistency is built slowly. It looks like them reaching out not only when you're upset, but because they're thinking of you. It looks like them planning ahead instead of reacting. It looks like them starting to consider your emotional rhythm as part of their own internal landscape. They begin to protect the bond, not just avoid breaking it. That's a huge shift. And here's where it gets even deeper. When avoidants prioritize the relationship, they're not just showing up more often, they're showing up more authentically. They stop hiding behind logic or deflection. They start allowing their natural affection to surface. They might hold your hand longer. They might lean in during conversations instead of away. They might begin to express their feelings, not always fluently, but with intent. You begin to feel chosen, not just tolerated, seen, not just handled. Their priorities shift, not because of pressure, but because of resonance. They're not managing an expectation, they're nurturing a connection. And this is when their language starts to change. You'll hear fewer phrases like, I don't know if I'm good at this, and more phrases like, I want to try. Fewer apologies for who they are, and more presence in who they're becoming. They may not be poetic, but they'll be intentional. They may not flood you with emotion, but they'll begin to protect your peace. And that's when you know they're not surviving this relationship anymore. They're showing up to build it. And it doesn't stop there. Their attentiveness deepens. They begin to take note of your small habits, the way your tone shifts when you're tired, the way your silence speaks when something's off. They stop brushing off those things. They start leaning in. They ask better questions. They start offering emotional support, not always with words, but with time, with consistency, with presence. This is where love Stoic takes root, where love stops being a battlefield and becomes a bridge, a structure they show up to maintain, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And real love for them doesn't come naturally. It comes through transformation. This shift toward prioritization isn't about romantic highs. It's about relational depth. They begin to realize that your well-being impacts theirs, that your silence feels different now, that your absence isn't just noticed, it's felt. And as that bond deepens, they stop needing to withdraw to feel safe. They start feeling safe in showing up, not all at once, but steadily. And in that steadiness, you'll see their love. You'll feel their care, not in the grand theatrical sense, but in the quiet, loyal, dependable way that signals they've anchored to something real. Yous have become a home. And if this part of the journey resonates with you, if you're seeing signs that someone is beginning to choose you with their behavior, not just their words, then this video is for you. Let's keep going deeper together. Like this video and comment #1 if you're feeling it. And if you're on this journey and want more guidance, more insight, more grounded truth about love and connection, hit that subscribe button now. You don't want to miss what's coming next. 5. They stop needing control to feel secure. When an avoidant finally begins to feel safe in love, there's a shift so profound that if you're watching closely, you can feel it before you can even explain it. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't look the way most people expect. It's not loud, it's not declarative. It's not them waking up one morning with an epiphany that changes everything. No, it's quieter than that, deeper than that. It's a slow disarming of control. It's the moment they stop needing to dominate the emotional dynamic in order to feel safe. The moment they stop calculating every interaction to make sure they always have the upper hand. Because control for the avoidant isn't about power, it's about protection. It's about making sure they never again feel what they once felt. Helpless, engulfed, invisible, or betrayed. It's a nervous system reflex disguised as independence. But once emotional safety enters the picture, something begins to soften, their grip loosens. The strategies they've used to protect themselves, pulling away when it gets too close, shutting down to avoid disappointment, staying vague to avoid expectations, they start to feel unnecessary. Not because the fear is gone, but because your consistency has begun to overpower it. In Stoicism, we learn that true power doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from mastering our response to uncertainty. And that's what the avoidant begins to learn through safety. They begin to understand that control is not the only path to security. That love, when it's real, doesn't require constant management. It simply asks for presence. And so they stop scanning for the next time. You'll let them down. They stop pulling away before every moment of intimacy. They stop sabotaging the good before it becomes too meaningful. And instead they start leaning in even when the fear is still there, especially when the fear is still there. That's the transformation. It's not that they no longer feel triggered, it's that they no longer obey the trigger. They no longer let it dictate the pace or direction of the connection. They stop asking themselves, how do I keep this from hurting me? And start asking, what if I let this feel good? That is revolutionary. That's not casual. That's psychological war being replaced by peace. And you'll feel it. You'll feel it in the way they begin to stay in hard conversations instead of shutting down. In the way they begin to share their emotions before things boil over. In the way they begin to include you in their inner world, not as a threat, but as a partner. They stop controlling through silence and start communicating through trust. They begin to prioritize clarity over mystery, honesty over ambiguity, because now the fear of being misunderstood has become less painful than the consequences of remaining emotionally unavailable. And so they risk, not perfectly, not always smoothly, but they begin. And in that beginning, a new kind of relationship is born, one where control isn't the currency, where dominance isn't the default, where connection can exist without calculation. And this matters because for most of their lives, the avoidant has associated love with a loss of self. Every past experience taught them that to let someone in meant to give up their identity, their emotional boundaries, their agency. So they overcorrected. They withdrew. They maintained emotional distance as a way to maintain personal power. But now, with you, they're learning something new. They're learning that love doesn't have to consume. It can complement. It doesn't have to cage. It can coexist. And that realization changes everything. It shifts their orientation from self-preservation to shared experience, from isolation to intimacy, from fear to courage. They begin to take emotional responsibility for their side of the relationship. Not because you asked, but because they want to, because they've stopped viewing your presence as a potential threat to their freedom and started seeing it as an extension of it. That's love Stoic. That's the kind of love that doesn't flinch under pressure, that doesn't seek control as a form of comfort, that learns to trust the natural unfolding of connection without having to force it, fix it, or flee from it. And in this stage, they begin to show up differently. Not because they've become someone new, but because they've stopped needing to protect the old version of themselves. The version that couldn't trust. The version that had to win every emotional exchange to feel safe. The version that believed closeness and chaos were the same thing. You'll see the difference in how they handle tension. They won't storm out. They won't ghost. They won't weaponize silence the way they once did. Instead, they'll stay. They'll sit in the discomfort. They'll hold eye contact longer. They'll speak more slowly, more intentionally. They'll start using words like, I feel, I didn't know how to say this before. And when that happens, don't rush them. Don't praise them too quickly or spotlight the moment like it's a performance. Just witness it. Just hold the space. Because what you're watching is not just an avoidant growing. It's a belief system unraveling. A deeply ingrained pattern that told them, you can't trust love. You can't trust closeness. You can't trust anyone but yourself. And now through your consistency, they're starting to believe, maybe for the first time, that they were wrong. Not about the pain of the past, but about the inevitability of the future, that love can in fact be something else, that it can be safe, that it can be stable, that it can be chosen without being controlling. And when they begin to let go of control, what you receive in return is not weakness. It's the most raw, real, grounded version of their love. It's a love that doesn't need to dominate to feel secure. A love that doesn't need to test to feel worthy. A love that doesn't require escape routes, because it finally feels free on its own terms. That's the kind of love that changes people, that rewires trauma, that teaches the nervous system that presence is not the enemy, that silence is not punishment, that closeness is not a trap. That love can be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. So if you're witnessing your avoidant partner begin to soften, to stay, to release their grip on control, understand how big that is. Understand that this is not just about a better relationship. It's about emotional rebirth. And that rebirth doesn't come with guarantees, but it does come with gravity, with meaning, with presence, with a love that is no longer defensive but deliberate, no longer guarded but grounded, no longer cold but conscious. And that, more than anything else, is worth recognizing because it means you've reached a place in their heart that most people never even get close to. You've become not just a partner, but a reflection of their healing. And that's something sacred, something rare, something real. That sets love stoic. 6. They love through the fear, not in the absence of it. There's a moment rare and sacred when you look at someone who once flinched at the sound of intimacy and realize they're still scared, but they're choosing to stay. That's what separates real transformation from superficial change. Avoidants don't magically become secure overnight. Their nervous system doesn't wake up one day and decide it's safe to be touched, trusted, seen. The alarms don't stop ringing just because love knocks gently. No, those alarms stay on. The fear still whispers. The reflex to pull away still flickers in the background. But what changes, what truly defines the shift, is their decision to love anyway. Not because the fear is gone, but because the love has grown stronger than the fear. And that is what makes their love so different. So raw, so powerful. They're not offering you affection from a place of emotional ease. They're offering it from the battlefield, from within the tension, from the very place they once used to run from. That's where love stoic begins to show its deepest form, not in the absence of emotion, but in the conscious choice to engage with it despite its discomfort. The avoidant, when safe, doesn't become someone else. They become more of themselves. They begin to integrate the exiled parts of who they are, the soft part, the attached part, the curious part, the part that wants to reach out and hold you without second guessing whether that makes them weak. That part starts to breathe again, to stretch, to risk. And the most extraordinary thing happens. They begin to love you in real time while still feeling the tremors of their old programming. They begin to do the things they once avoided, not because they're fearless, but because they finally believe there's something more important than staying protected. You'll feel this shift in the little moments, the way they reach for your hand first, the way they initiate conversations they would have once dodged, the way they show up for you, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard. You'll feel it in how they apologize, how they own their reactions, how they try to repair rather than retreat. And you'll notice the fear doesn't vanish. It just stops leading the dance. That's the difference. They might still get quiet, still go inward, still hesitate, but now they come back faster. Now they talk about it. Now they let you in. And that letting in, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's the wisdom of someone who's learned that true security isn't built in distance. It's found in mutual presence. And in Stoicism, presence is everything. To stand grounded in the storm, to remain calm in uncertainty, to choose openness not because it's easy, but because it's right. The avoidant is now embodying that principle. And in doing so, they're not just healing, they're rewriting the rules of connection. They begin to show affection not because they think they should, but because they want to. They begin to notice your needs without feeling threatened by them. They stop seeing closeness as control and start recognizing it as collaboration. It's subtle but seismic. They no longer use silence as a shield. They use words, even imperfect ones, as a bridge. They no longer interpret their own anxiety as a sign that the relationship is wrong. They begin to see it as a wound being touched, not a red flag being waved. And when that happens, they start showing up for you, not just as a partner, but as a participant. They're no longer in the relationship cautiously observing. They're in it building, choosing, tending. And you'll begin to feel something deeper than romantic compatibility. You'll feel alignment, commitment, not to a perfect version of each other, but to the process. The process of staying, of returning, of softening together, even when it's hard. That's what stoicism in love looks like. Not perfection, but presence. Not avoidance of pain, but resilience in the face of it. And when the avoidant begins to embody that, their love becomes unlike anything you've experienced before. Not flashy, not chaotic, just steady. Honest, intentional, rooted. And this is the part where most people get it wrong. They assume that if an avoidant still gets scared, they must not be healed. But healing isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to be ruled by it. So if they're still scared and still showing up, you're witnessing something sacred. You're witnessing someone rebuild trust in real time. You're witnessing someone choose you while still untangling the belief that love leads to loss. That steps not just love, that steps revolution. And the courage it takes to keep loving you, even when their body says to run, is immeasurable. It's quiet. It's brave. It's consistent. And yes, it will be imperfect. They'll still stumble, still overthink, still question their place in your heart. But they'll ask now. They'll reach now. They'll open now. Not because it sits easy, because it sets worth it. And you, if you're present and emotionally aware, will start to feel this energy shift. It's no longer a relationship where you're trying to prove your value. It's a relationship where they're learning to hold your value, to reflect it, to protect it, not as a duty, but as a desire. They begin to prioritize safety, not just for themselves, but for you. They stop avoiding hard conversations because now they see those conversations as gateways, not threats. And this is the real transformation. They stop seeing the relationship as something that could break them. They start seeing it as something that can grow them. You become their mirror, their anchor, their new emotional baseline. And through that mirror, they begin to see who they really are beneath the armor. Not cold, not distant, just scared, and now slowly brave. That's the beauty of a love stoic, where love isn't about possession or performance, but about shared presence, mutual respect, and emotional bravery. And if you've reached this part of their journey, if you're now the one they choose to stay near, even while trembling, then you've become more than just a person they love. You've become a reason they believe in love again, a reason they keep showing up. And if this resonates, if you've seen even a glimpse of this shift in someone you love or in yourself, go ahead and like this video and comment #1 below. Let me know that you're walking this journey too. And if you want to keep growing in emotional depth, awareness, and presence, don't forget to subscribe. The next part of this journey is where we talk about how this kind of love becomes not just healing, but sacred. Let's go there together. The most profound transformations in love don't come from loud declarations or grand moments of epiphany. They emerge from subtle shifts, the kind you only notice when you're present enough to feel them and still enough to hold space for them. When you've journeyed this far with someone who has lived much of their emotional life in avoidance, what you're witnessing is nothing short of a psychological and spiritual rebirth. Not the kind that's sudden or cinematic, but the kind that's earned over time through stillness, patience, and an unwavering sense of presence. Because the avoidant doesn't heal through being rushed. They don't grow through confrontation. They evolve through safety, through the consistent message that says, I see you, I won't push you, I'm not here to change you, but I'm also not going to disappear just because you flinch. And that message, when delivered over time through calm energy and grounded action, begins to erode the walls that once seemed immovable. That is the quiet miracle of love rooted in stoicism. Not passion without responsibility, but passion anchored in maturity, depth, and emotional courage. You begin to see that what you're part of is more than a relationship. It's a re-education of the heart. You're watching someone learn, often for the first time, that they're allowed to be known without being punished. That their silence isn't something to weaponize, but something that can be understood. That their desire to retreat isn't rejection, but self-protection they haven't yet learned to outgrow. And when they start to trust that your love isn't conditional, that your care doesn't crumble under pressure, something deep inside them begins to shift. They start returning to conversations they once would have escaped. They start listening to your needs without interpreting them as accusations. They begin to understand that love isn't a loss of power, it's a redirection of it. It's not about who controls the emotional terrain, but who co-creates it. And that co-creation doesn't come from demand. It comes from modeling. You model what safety looks like. You model what curiosity without judgment feels like. You become the steady heartbeat in the room when their mind starts to race. The grounded breath when their anxiety spikes. The presence that says, I'm not here to trap you. I'm here to meet you. And eventually they stop seeing love as something they need to survive and start seeing it as something they can breathe in. They begin to recognize that affection isn't an invasion, that intimacy isn't a loss of identity, that connection isn't a countdown to collapse. These are truths that seem obvious to securely attached people, but to an avoidant, they are revelations. They are disruptions of a long-standing emotional narrative that told them closeness was always followed by cost. And now they're rewriting that story with you. Not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more of who they always were before fear took over. The tenderness that once hid behind distance now starts to speak. The loyalty that was buried under hesitation begins to act. The desire for connection, once disguised as independence, finally steps forward. And all of it happens without fanfare, without drama. It unfolds through micro moments of emotional bravery. That's what love Stoic is. Not performative, but persistent. Not sensational, but sacred. It's not about never feeling fear. It's about loving through fear with steadiness and clarity. And in that love, something else begins to bloom. Self-awareness. The avoidant starts taking responsibility for their role in the dynamic. They start naming the ways they've self-sabotaged, not to punish themselves, but to free themselves. They begin to realize that their avoidance wasn't strength. It was defense. And now with you, they no longer need to live in defense mode. They begin to see themselves not as broken, but as brave. Not as incapable, but as reawakening. And as that awareness expands, their empathy grows. They start noticing your feelings more. They begin asking different questions. They start responding with care instead of calculation. And all of this doesn't just heal them, it heals you. It shifts the relational dynamic from one of managing pain to cultivating connection, from questioning your worth to feeling deeply chosen. From navigating their reactions to sharing your experiences. And this is the kind of love that doesn't fade. Because it was never based on superficial compatibility. It was based on deep, shared effort. It was forged in moments where giving up would have been easier, but you both stayed. Not because you didn't have doubts, but because the bond was worth working through those doubts. And now you're here. In a place where words don't have to be perfect because presence speaks louder. In a connection where the past no longer writes the future. Where old wounds no longer run the show. Where love isn't just something you feel, it's something you build. And this kind of love isn't about chasing highs. It's about holding space. It's about becoming a mirror for each other's growth. A witness to each other's healing. A partner in emotional restoration. Not once, but every day. In the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you come back again and again with patience instead of pressure. That's what turns emotional survival into emotional intimacy. That's what turns nervous system chaos into relational calm. That's what transforms a bond from fragile to fortified. And if you've made it this far, if you spare the one who has held space, who has offered calm instead of correction, who has loved through the pauses and not just the progress, then know this: you are not just a partner in someone's healing. You are a turning point in their story. And not just theirs, yours too. Because to love someone avoidant without losing yourself requires your own depth, your own clarity, your own commitment to emotional evolution. This path teaches you to be stronger than your reactions, to lead with understanding instead of urgency, to ground yourself in reality rather than fantasy. And in that growth, you don't just witness a love story, you become it. You become the quiet force that shifts the trajectory of someone's entire emotional world. And they, in turn, become the living proof that love doesn't have to be fast to be fierce, doesn't have to be loud to be lasting, doesn't have to be perfect to be profound. This is the slow miracle of connection, built not on perfection, but presence. And it changes everything.